a concept called promises. Does anyone have any familiarity with this concept? Hey, you're defining it by itself, right? Promise is a promise. Is a promise. Okay, say that one more time, Nick.
It's like a way to run code at a later time.
Okay, potentially. Although, the interesting thing about a promise is that it's considered greedy, which means that it will try to run immediately. Okay? The only thing is that in terms of when it comes back with some data, we don't necessarily know when that's going to happen. Okay? So think about promises in terms of your real life. When somebody tells you something like, I promise I will bring you something, or I promise I will tell you something at some point, right? Yeah, we'll be there. That's a good one, right? That's a really good one. So you're kind of thinking to yourself, how much do I trust this person, right? How reliable are they? I don't really know. So in terms of programming, when we talk about promises, the idea that I want you guys to get, so if you take nothing else, from this demo, is that a promise is just this idea of a future value that may or may not show up. Okay, there's a possibility that that value you're expecting won't come through. So let's say that we were trying to send a request to some outside service, and that service was down, right? Our promise would essentially fail because their service was down. Didn't mean that we did anything wrong. It just means that it didn't work because something was wrong on that side, right? All right. So let's see kind of what a promise looks like in code. I've got my terminal down below, and we're going to create an array of things. And I'm thinking we'll do an array of planets because I think that's kind of fun. Okay, so we'll say planets, Earth. Well, let's do them in order, right? So the first one is Mercury, right? Did I have that right? Is Venus next?
Yeah.
Venus. Okay, cool. Earth,
No, I said Earth, Mars,
Mars. Jupiter's next. Is Saturn after Jupiter?
I feel like it's Saturn.
And then Uranus.
That's my favorite planet.
Well, this caused a lot of controversy. Okay. And then is Pluto?
Maybe Pluto.
One more? There is?
Yes. It's back now. It's back
Let me
now.
Google.
Nibiru?
You can Google it. It's back.
So Pluto is not one, but this one is
We're
one?
thinking of like Death Star or something.
Is this right? All right, I'll trust you guys.
Death
Promise that you're not pulling my leg.
I'm not.
All right. All right, cool. So we've got this array of planets, and our job is we want to create a function that can go grab us one of the planets from this database. It's not really a database, obviously, but we're going to kind of pretend like it is for the time being, just so that we can get familiar with this concept. So I'm going to create a function, and we'll call it getPlanet by ID. Okay? So what do you think I'm going to take in there? An ID, right? And so for our purposes, the ID is really just going to be an index inside this array. So we'll keep it super simple. All right. So if I were doing this normally, like if we didn't have to make some kind of a request to our database, we were just going to get it right away, how would I get that out? I would return what? Yeah, at the index of ID, like that, right? And that would get it for me immediately. So we can test this out and make sure that this is working. So let's just go console.log get planets by ID, and then I'll just pass in 1, and we are, of course, expecting that that's going to return Venus, right? Because that's at the 1 index. Okay, perfect, working as expected. But now we're going to pretend like we have to go dig into our database, okay? And this is something that's going to happen asynchronously. Can anyone tell me what that means when I say asynchronously?
Something is running and it doesn't have to run right away.
Yeah, and so Nick was kind of getting at the same thing, which is that our code is going to run line by line still, but then some piece of it is going to be kind of like taken out of that equation. Okay? It'll be sort of set aside, and then once that data comes back, then it will finish what it was doing. Okay? That's essentially how a promise is going to be working. Okay? So instead of just simply returning out the planet, what I want to do is I want to create something called a promise. So this is how we do it. We say new promise. So what does that look like right there? Yeah, like a constructor, right? We're creating a new instance of this class. Very good. Perfect. And can you guys guess what we might have to pass in here when we create a new promise? Yeah, wouldn't that be crazy if we had to pass another promise to a promise? Wow. Be very recursive. Oh, a function. I heard it over here. A callback function. Woo. Aren't we learning to love callback functions?
No one knows what
Nobody knows what it means. Yeah, let's define that real quickly. So who's got a good definition of a callback function? Now that you guys have been sort of interacting with them for a little while, how would you describe it? Okay, are you calling it instead of
You just call it when you trigger that? Is it?
Are you ever calling it? That's kind of what I'm asking. So are we, in our code, are we actually invoking that function? No. We're sort of handing over the control to some other code that's going to run it on our behalf, right? So that's essentially what a callback function is. It's just something that we write that we want to have happen, but we don't invoke it directly. We hand over the whole definition to some other code.
Just like when we were typing and it was typing on this side.
Yeah, we provided that function to say console log out what's in that input at this time, but we didn't directly invoke console.log, right? It was just part of our callback. Okay, so in this callback function, this is how it's going to look. We're going to take in a function called resolve, and we're going to take in another function called reject. All right? And what these two functions do is they when we invoke them, they're going to signal to our promise that we've either successfully gotten whatever value we were trying to get, or if we call the reject function, that's saying that whatever we were trying to do failed, didn't work out. Okay? Okay, so if I was just trying to do this as is, let's go ahead and pretend like there's no kind of time delay. So we'll just go ahead and say return, or we're going to resolve against planets at that specific ID, right? Okay. Now, let's do this. I'm going to set this as a variable, so I'll say my planet equals getPlanet by ID. Okay. And then immediately after, what I'm going to do is I'm going to console log my planet. What do you guys think that's going to log? So yeah, the planet that we were looking at was Venus. So is this going to log Venus? How many people think that's what's going to happen? Nobody? Nobody's willing to raise their hand. All right, brave souls. A couple people think so. All right. Fight for the right. So let's check it out. So let's save this. Oh, look, it's saying promise and then Venus. So it looks like that promise did resolve, huh? It was Venus, right? It actually resolved to Venus. Yep. Okay, but now let's change things up a little bit. Let's assume that that this database is going to kind of take some time to come back, and we'll just kind of create a random time that we want this to happen. So I'm going to call a function that you guys probably haven't seen before, set timeout. Okay. Okay. So what the set timeout takes, as you guys can see, is it's going to take some callback function that I want to run. And then the second thing that it takes is how long, like after how long, how many milliseconds do I want this thing to run? Okay, so I'm just going to create a little anonymous function inside here. And we'll deal with the body of that function in a second. So as far as how long we want it to wait, I'm going to create kind of like a random time, right? So we can say math.random, and then we could just multiply that by, I don't know, 3,000. So at the very longest, this thing could take 3 seconds to resolve. Okay. And then inside my set timeout here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if the ID that the person gave me is within our array, then let's give back the planet, right? If it's not in the array, then what do I want to do? I want to call this reject function, right? Okay, so let's do a quick if then here. So we'll say if ID, so we'll say, how are we going to do this? So I'm going to say if type of planets at ID is not undefined. So in other words, if that actually exists inside of our array, then what do we want to do? We want to resolve against that value. Okay, and then what am I going to do in the else here? I'm going to reject, and then we could pass in some value for our rejection. So you could see it's a reason, right? It could say something like that planet does not exist. Okay. All right. So now we have this planet that we're trying to get by ID, and you could see that it's actually a promise. Why is that resolving so fast? Something's acting kind of funky here. Hang on. It should be telling me that that promise is pending. Any of you have any idea why that's not pending right now? This is bothering me. Well, so the issue is this: if I've returned a promise from this function, right? I've got this promise, but I shouldn't yet have the value. But it seems to be telling me that I already have the value, which bothers me because I put in some kind of random time that should take some time to come back, right? Let's say we do. Let me just change this to 3,000. So let's assume turning a promise. Okay. All right.
Does it matter if you have the resolve planets ID instead of the return?
Say that one more time. Where like.
Because it's waiting for the result to the timeout, but then it'll skip that and it'll just resolve anyway.
Okay, yeah. So it's a little confusing to read, but this is what's happening. So we're calling this function set timeout, which is saying after 3,000 milliseconds, let's run this function right here. That's another callback,
Then it
right?
skips that and then it resolves planet ID.
Oh shoot! Yes, that was the problem. Thank you. So it's like we resolved it immediately. Okay. Oh, there we go. Pending. Ah, sanity. I forgot to remove that. Dang it. Okay. Good catch. Okay, cool. So now we've got this thing, and that's why I was asking you guys before, do we think that this is going to say Venus, right? It actually doesn't. It says pending. So promise has these different states that it could be in. It could be in a state of pending, where it's still waiting for whatever is supposed to come back. It can be in a resolved status, in which case it's already gotten the value back, or it can be in a rejected status. Okay. So in order for us to actually make use of that value, because this is, you guys can see that it's in a pending state here, we have to chain another call to it. So I have to say dot then. Okay? And what this is saying is that once this promise resolves, I'm going to give you another function to run. Okay? It's another callback. Okay, so if I just wanted to say log out the value of that planet, I can say console.log inside here. That's my callback function, right? So once I get the planet back, it's going to console log it for me. So let me save this. You see how there was a bit of a delay there? Because I programmed in that 3,000 millisecond delay there. So after 3,000 milliseconds, it finally came back.
So the
So
then
let
statement.
me get rid of this real quick. Well, I was just going to make it back so that it's actually random.
So the then statement, it's you put in the then statement for that same promise after you call the function, or it's not inside the definition of the I'm not understanding correctly.
Oh, you're asking why is .then not inside of our get planet
Or like
by
yeah,
ID?
or like that's the proper person. I mean, obviously it's working, but
Yeah.
Is it attached to the variable you created, the
or it get
Well, let's instead of doing const my planet, let's just change it so that we're whoops, I didn't mean to do that. So that we're just invoking this get planet by ID.
oh,
Okay.
it's just a method inside. Oh,
So now what we're doing is we're calling this function right here, but it's not actually returning a value straight away, right? It's returning a promise that it will give me back a value at some point in the future. In order for me to actually have access to that value, I need to pass it some kind of a callback function. Because we don't know when it's going to return, in much the same way that if we set up some handlers in our JSX, we don't know when a person's going to click on the button, right? All we're saying is that when that happens, run this function. So that's exactly what's going on here. We're saying when that planet comes back, go ahead and console.log it.
and you can put that on the same line, right? So it'll read kind of like it's a method of that.
Sure.
I mean, just
Yeah, you can go like that.
Okay.
Yeah, no problem.
That was good. Yeah.
Okay. And then let's say we wanted to also be able to handle if there was some kind of an error here, right? Something went wrong. Maybe I provided a bad ID or something. We would have this other call to .catch. So when we provide a callback function for .catch, that means that if this thing gets rejected, then this callback will run instead. Okay. So I'll just do the same thing. I'll just throw my console.log inside there. And then instead of a planet ID of 1, let's put something in there that we know is not valid, right? Put in an ID of 11. You guys can see that we are indeed getting our error here, right? That planet does not exist. So where is that being triggered in our code? Line 30. That's what we specified for our .catch, right? Yeah, so it means that if this promise didn't resolve, if it rejects, run this function.
Does it always come behind
Sorry, does what always come
Catch.
behind? .catch. Oh, does it always come behind .then?
Not behind concept. I mean, you have to put catch and then concept log always.
No, we could do whatever we want. I could create a new callback function in here, So I could create an error, or my callback function is going to take in an error, right? Okay, so what if I had like an array of errors or something like that? Const errors. So it's empty originally, and then once this thing fails, I'm going to add to my errors array. So I could say something like errors.push this specific error, and then we could just console.log out our errors if we wanted to. Okay, so you see now we have this array that has one error inside of it, right? And that's me pushing to it. But notice how this all happened within the callback function, right? Because otherwise, if I tried to do that down here somewhere, do I have access to this error? The only place I have access to the error is inside the body of this callback function. So if I want to give my outside code some reference to it, I'm going to have to push it in like I did, because this errors variable essentially is available to all the rest of my code, right? Okay, but if I console log errors down here, what would it look like? No, it's not undefined. I did define it, right? There we go. It's an empty array. It's still an empty array, so that's how it started out. And so my code is being read line by line. It's reading this, then it's running that function. But that could resolve or reject, could take some time, right? And then it immediately jumps down here to this console log, which means at this point in time, it's still an empty array. Hasn't been changed. So this is the thing that becomes kind of tricky for people to understand. See, it's still an empty array. So our code's still being read line by line. It's just that once we involve some kind of an asynchronous operation like this, whatever, that's either returning or rejecting is, it's going to take a little time for that to happen. Now let me ask you this. If I want to get more than one planet, okay, and this time we'll do something that's legit, so we'll pass in an ID of 1, and that one was Venus, right? And then I do another call to get planet by ID, and this time I pass in an ID of 2, so that should be us, right? I'll do the same thing here, .then, console.log. Is there any guarantee that I will get Venus before I get Earth? Yeah, no guarantee whatsoever, right? I could easily get Earth first, so let's save it and let's see what happens here. Okay, so that time I got Venus first. Let me just change something so that, I don't know. I'll just add an extra semicolon so that it saves again. Still doing it. It's always hard to prove this when your thing doesn't cooperate. Come on. Oh, Jesus. All right. Finally! Yeah, we demonstrated the point, right? It could happen that the second one resolves before the first. Okay. So, yeah, I don't know why it was as unlikely as it was. But, so then the question comes in, okay, so if I'm trying to get sort of two things at the same time, and I want them to come back in the same order that I provided them in, how can I do that? Well, there is a way to do it. Okay, I can do this thing called promise.all. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I need to pass that an array of promises. Okay, so the first promise I'm going to put in there will be get planet by ID. And this time, I'm gonna do Earth first, just to demonstrate we're always kind of getting it in the order that we expect. So we'll say ID of 2, and the second one is going to be get planet by ID, and then we'll pass in an ID of 1. Now I can say dot then console.log, right? And let me comment out some of these guys here. Comment out this. Okay, so notice here that once those promises both resolved, I got back this array that had values for each one. So the value here is Earth, the value for the second one is Venus. Okay, that's a way that I can guarantee that if both promises resolve, I'm able to iterate through them in the same order in which I provided them up here. So sometimes, let's say we wanted to make concurrent requests to 2 different services or something. So I'm trying to get something over here from Zillow and something over here from Redfin. I make these 2 concurrent requests. I can send them out at the same time and then wait to do something until they're both resolved, like this, using promise.log. Because we don't know how long either request would take, wouldn't that be kind of sucky if I had to send a request to Zillow and then I had to wait a second for that to come back and then I had to send a request to Redfin? I want to send them both out at the same time, and then once they both come back, then do something with the results. Yeah, I'm just saying if we were trying to make 2 separate requests, maybe to separate services, and they could let's say our request to service 1 is going to take 1 second, our request to service 2 will take 2 seconds. If I do them one after the other, then it's going to take me 3 seconds in total, right? If I send them both out at the same time, then in total the whole thing's going to take me 2 seconds. So it's increasing our efficiency. So we don't need to make our users wait so long because we're sending these out in parallel. All right. Questions? Glazed over eyes.
Are unpredictable.
Unpredictable. All right, what do you mean by that?
But when you're trying to run Earth before Venus, like Venus came out first,
Because again, there's no guarantee of how fast something's going to come back because I'm specifying a random time, right? There's no reason why one had to come back before the other. It just depends on what that random time was. Yeah. And that will be the case as well when we're doing things on the front end of our websites and we're making requests to our server. It'll be really fast because all of that stuff is on our computer, right? I mean, you won't notice much lag there, but the thing is, we still don't know how long it's going to take. It could be, 10 milliseconds. It could be 100 milliseconds. We don't really know. But what the promise does is it allows us to respond to it either way. Either if this thing happens successfully or if something goes wrong, we can do something about it, right? That's where the callbacks come into play. How do we want to handle that situation? All right, so let's just read through this real quick. Albert, 1 to 11, what's going on there?
Creating an array called planets.
Good. And then we're just dropping in all the strings that we need, right? Okay. 13, Nick, what's going on?
We have a function called getPlanet by ID that's taking in all the ID as
Good. What do we return?
we're going to return a new promise.
Okay.
Taking in callback, resolve and reject.
Good. So a promise is a special object, so we're creating a new instance of that class, right? Good. And then inside of our callback, what are we doing?
We'll be set timeout
Good.
with the callback.
You guys see how things are starting to drift to the right a little bit? That's callback hell. I mean, it's the beginnings of callback hell.
First level
This
of
could
hell.
get way worse. Yeah. All right. So the first thing that we're passing it, you said, was a callback. Cool. And then what are we doing inside that callback function?
We have if statement,
Mhm.
if else, and we also have the timer for set timeout.
Yeah. So we're saying if that planet exists inside of our array, then let's call this resolve function to give it back, right? If it doesn't exist, then let's reject this promise with this error message. Okay? And then, as you mentioned, we're just saying down here, this is the delay that we want to have happen before our callback function gets run. So that's all we're doing. We're just saying, however long that random time turns out to be, then once that time has elapsed, go ahead and call this function, right? Okay, good. That was probably the toughest part of this code to read, right? Because of that, yeah, good job. Because of that drifting to the right that we're seeing, that nested callback pattern. Okay.
Indenting doesn't matter as much in JavaScript as it does in Python. How much
Yeah,
does it
it's important in the sense of we want our code to be readable, but yeah, it certainly wouldn't complain to you, at you if you didn't use indentation. Yeah. Whereas in Python, it is required. You're right. Okay, so down here, this is what we're doing. Lines 43 to 47, Erica.
So you were saying the promise that all arrays.
This is interesting. So I'm saying promise.all. Did I create a new promise here? No.
We're passing in.
Which means that this is probably a static method. You guys remember what that means? It doesn't require an instance of the class to run this, right? Okay. All right, so we're calling this static method, and what are we providing it?
Get planet ID with the index.
Okay, so we're providing an array of what? What are these things?
The planets
No?
index.
No. What are they? They're not planets or indices, right? What are
Parameters.
they? No. Anyone else? It's the subject of today's discussion. They're promises.
Oh,
Yeah, because this function call returns what? A promise. So it's just an array that has two promises in it now.
So
That's all that these function calls resolve to, is a promise.
this is a static method. If we have promises in several different function names, we can put them all in that one single array. Like
If I want to wait until they all resolve, yeah, we could put them
like get
inside
names
that
by
one
ID,
array.
and
Mhm.
then all that promises within that
Yes.
same array.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And then what's going on down here, Eric, on line 47?
and then the concept of
So
Semicolon.
yeah, so we're calling this method called then, right? So our then method allows us to actually wait until all of these promises resolve. And once they do, then we're just console logging them out, right? Yes, you
What does then do again? Sorry, one time you use it, so I just decided that way.
You can use then whenever you're dealing with a promise.
Oh, that's the only way.
Yeah. Or if you're working in some class that actually has a method called then you can call it, right? But promises should always have that method then. Yeah. Okay. And then, by the same token, if one of my promises is rejected, I could do that, right?
So basically,
So if I were to change this to, say, ID of 11, and that way I know that something's going to reject, and let's save that and run it. See, we got that planet does not exist. So because one of them failed, I got into my .catch here. Yes.
so basically, catch just
Well, be careful. It's not dot. This is not actually returning anything per se. It's not returning an error, but we provide it with a callback function. That callback function will have access to the error if one does occur, right? Okay. All right, I'll share this with you guys on Mattermost.
I use it.
Hmm? Oh yeah, of course. No, I uploaded all the videos. Yep, definitely. Cool. And I know this is kind of a tough concept, so I'm not expecting everyone to walk out of here being like, yeah, all the way. But again, I just wanted you guys to get this idea that it's a promise in code is very similar to sort of how it is in real life, which is that, you know, I'm hoping to get something back in the future. I don't know for sure though that it's going to work out the way that I hope, right? Fingers crossed. All right.
It was like the most like common times